Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the AI and Marginalized Communities live stream hosted by All Tech is Human in partnership with the Mozilla Rise 25 Awards. My name is Sandra Khalil. I'm the Associate Director at All Tech is Human, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all today to this very essential conversation. At All Tech is Human, our mission is to align technology with the public interest, ensuring that technology innovation and consideration is responsible, inclusive, and collaborative. We bring together a diverse coalition of voices, from technologists to policymakers to advocates to community leaders, because we firmly believe that meaningful progress requires input from all corners of society. And you, as an end user of technology, have a very valuable voice in deciding how the future of technology should be. Today's discussion, which I'm so excited for, is especially significant because we're diving into the intersection of artificial intelligence and its effect on marginalized populations. We'll explore not only the challenges that communities face, including but not limited to bias, exclusion, and access issues, but also the incredible opportunities that technology can bring to amplify voices, to expand opportunities, and foster equity. Our panelists will not only bring a wealth of experience and lived experience to help us examine these critical issues, but also a range of perspective on the experience of the marginalized community here. We will navigate this conversation on actionable next steps. What policies, partnerships, and innovations do you think that AI can evolve to work for everyone? And also, overall, how can we contribute to building a more inclusive technological future that is equitable for all? We're excited to hear your thoughts, so be sure to use the comment feature today, and I will be assisting in elevating comments to the panel. And share your ideas, share where you're tuning in from, and enjoy this conversation. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to share where you're tuning in from, share your thoughts, share your questions. I'm tuning in from New York today. And be sure to also join us weekly for these live stream series with All Tech is Human. We're so grateful for the Mozilla Rise 25 partnership. And we tune in every Thursday at 1 p.m. to ensure that we bring these great discussions to you. So if you ever have an idea, be sure to share that with us. Find us on Slack and visit us at alltechishuman.org for more information out there. Now it's my great pleasure to bring on our great moderator today, All Tech is Human affiliate, Lema Mohammed, to also bring on Dr. Desmond Patton, our Mozilla Rise 25 honoree and AI ethics expert for this critical conversation.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Hi, everyone. Happy pre-Friday. As Sandra said, my name is Lema Mohammed. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am the Inaugural Tech Policy Fellow at NYU Center for Social Media and Politics, which is an academic research institute that studies how our shifting online environment impacts politics, policy, and democracy. At CSMAP, I essentially help insert the center's rigorous research into policy conversations around social media, technology, and democracy. Before joining CSMAP, I was a senior associate at the Glen Echo Group, which is a Washington, D.C., but public affairs and public relations firm specializing in technology policy. And I worked on policy and communications for nonprofit organizations operating within the AI, cyber, and privacy spaces. In addition to my role at CSMAP, I'm also an affiliate at All Tech is Human, where I've helped co-author reports on AI and human rights, building a better tech future, and technology and advancing technology and democracy, as well as serving as a mentor at Girl Security, which is the only nonprofit working to advance girls, young women, and gender minorities into pathways across the national security sector to ensure a more equitable and secure future for the world. Next, I'd like to introduce our main speaker, Dr. Desmond Patton, who is the Brian and Randy Schwartz University Professor and the 31st Penn Integrates Knowledge University Professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He holds joint appointments in the School of Social Policy and practice at the Annenberg School of Communication at UPenn, with secondary appointments in the Department of Psychiatry and the Perelman School of Medicine and the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, also known as CHOP. Professor Patton's groundbreaking research explores the relationship between social media and gun violence, grief, and loss, specifically how online communities can influence harmful offline behavior. This work has established him as the most cited and recognized scholar in this vital area of social science. His early research aimed at detecting trauma and preventing violence on social media has led to his current role as an expert on language analysis and bias in AI, a member of Spotify's Safety Advisory Council, the EEAC at Axon, a consultant at TikTok, and a safety advisor for NeighborZ. As a social scientist, Patton recognized that traditional data science techniques could not accurately capture key cultural nuances in the language of predominantly Black and Hispanic youth. To address this, he developed the contextual analysis of social media approach, which emphasizes culture, context, and inclusion in machine learning and computer vision analysis. Dr. Patton is a National Academy of Medicine member, an Obama Foundation USA leader, a Mozilla Rise 25 change agent, a presidential leadership scholar, and a top 50 in digital health at Rock Health. He also serves as an AI startup advisor. So, with this incredible introduction, I would like to get started with our conversation for today. Let's start with a general overview. For those that are new to the AI space, what are the primary sources of algorithmic bias in AI systems today? And how do these biases disproportionately impact marginalized communities, such as contributing to BIPOC-specific trauma?
Lama, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And it's really great to be in community with all of you today. So I think what we know is that algorithmic bias originates from multiple sources, but I think the two biggest culprits are biased data and the lack of diverse perspectives in the design of algorithmic systems. AI systems are often trained on historical data that reflect and reinforce systemic inequities. And then without careful examination, these systems perpetuate and even amplify those disparities. Equally troubling is the homogeneity in many AI development teams and engineering spaces where marginalized voices, unique voices, nuanced voices are absent. And the complexities of those lived experiences are often ignored. For communities of color, I think these biases have real consequences. In my own work, I have seen how algorithms misclassify culturally specific language or flag posts by Black and Brown youth as violent while ignoring similar conversations and engagements from other groups. And I think this isn't just a technical failure, it is a human one that deepens trauma and marginalization. And I think what's important to note here is that, this has been a journey for me. I didn't start here. This wasn't my entry point. I had to do a lot of critical reflection. I had to put myself in spaces with other folks who could challenge me and hold me accountable. Because the reality is that in my own training, I had imbibed lots of toxic and supremacist ideas about folks who looked like me. And until I was put in this situation where I had to evaluate language, it wasn't something that was hyper aware for me. So as my work evolved, I realized that focusing solely on fixing these things wouldn't be enough. And so I think we need to reimagine this entire process, starting with, I think, what are the right questions? And also collaborating with youth and community members has taught me that ethical AI development requires centering their perspectives, their context, and their needs.
I really love that. And I also love the connection you did to your own self-reflection, because internalized racism is a real thing, and we often don't talk about it in terms of its path to restorative justice. And so I really love that you brought that up. On a more positive note, can you share some examples of how we've successfully mitigated bias in AI? Is that even possible? And what lessons can be learned from those efforts as this technology continues to develop? I mean, we have generative AI, people are talking about AI agents. What are some things that we need to be focused on?
For sure. So, one of the examples that I'm proud of in my own work comes from some collaborations that I have with computer scientists at Columbia University, where I was on faculty for 7 years. And so I've been partnering with Kathy McEwen for almost 10 years now. And we have been developing algorithmic systems that recognize various emotional states like grief and loss alongside aggression. And initially, again, going back to that initial framework that I brought to this work is that we thought that we could identify threats of violence on social media, and that would tell us about bad actors and how to predict violence. But feedback from young people, their parents, communities really showed us that focusing exclusively on violence missed the broader emotional spectrum of their online experience, and it missed kind of why they were showing up on social media in the first place. And so by centering communities, by partnering with communities, and also by understanding where my expertise ends and where their expertise begins, it pushed us to ask better questions, questions that center well-being rather than just risk. And I think by incorporating these insights, we then began to design models that were not only accurate, but also more empathetic. And we also began to push back against this idea of accuracy. What does it mean to have accurate algorithmic systems that detect African American language? Is that going to be helpful or harmful? And I think this process showed me in particular that mitigating bias isn't just a technical challenge. And that's something that I think I have learned and been able to understand as a social worker. And I think I've been able to double down on my social work perspective to understand that I also think this is a relational experience and understanding as well. And I think it requires interdisciplinary teams and a willingness to slow down, not to speed up, but to slow down and reflect. And I think what we've learned is that the right questions asked in partnership with those who are most impacted can change the entire trajectory of a project. But you have to be willing to take those risks. And I think another lesson is the importance of transparency and accountability. There's open data practices or clear communication about a tool's limitations. But I think being honest about what AI can do, what are your non-negotiables as an individual or a team, are really important to building trust with communities that we serve and that we hope to work with in this AI development.
Yeah, I love that. And I really do appreciate you bringing in the importance of interdisciplinary thought. Because I feel like a lot of the times when we talk about very social issues, we quickly try to make it solved through technical lens, which sometimes these things aren't all technical, like the youth mental health epidemic, as some people might say. I mean, maybe social media is part of it, but we also need to think about like mass shootings, like climate crisis. Like we really need to be bringing all kinds of experts together for a common cause. So I really love that you brought that up. You mentioned a really great point on accountability. And as a researcher, one way to collect data is through scraping. How do you think about accountability and data ethics when working with sensitive data, particularly marginalized people's data? How are we ensuring vulnerable communities have power over their data and based on how it's collected, used, and shared?
This is a really great question. And I think it's about our own individual journeys, but it's also about the systems and institutions that we are embedded in and the kind of accountability mechanisms that are or are not available to us. And so one of the realities as a researcher that I have experienced is that the IRB, institutional review boards, have not been really helpful helping me to think about what is ethical or not. And so a lot of this has required having deep and complex conversations about how we should be doing our work. And a lot of those answers don't come from the academy. They come from thinking about how real people use real things. And so I think that data ethics starts with recognizing that marginalized communities have historically been exploited in research. That's just the starting point. And we can't repeat those patterns as we develop AI systems, but we have to develop a non-negotiable strategy for how we move forward. Scraping data from public platforms may seem like a convenient solution, and it is fraught with ethical risks, especially when the data represents the lived experiences of vulnerable populations. So I developed CHASM, which is the contextual analysis of social media approach, as a way of doing a couple things. One is unearthing bias as a researcher, and as folks who do annotation of social media data that is then used to train algorithmic systems to automatically find various psychological concepts. And so my work on CHASM, it is a tool we developed to analyze social media through a culturally informed lens. And it was born out of this need, I think, to challenge some of the harmful dynamics that I was seeing in my own work. So the goal of Chasm is to help identify emotional states like grief, loss, and aggression while being laser focused on cultural context. So this approach has been transformative, but it's also been a learning practice and process. And I've had to confront how some early methods that I learned or adopted unintentionally amplified harm, which taught me that asking the right questions in collaboration with communities and young people is vital for this space. But I think what I want to underscore is that we have to figure out how power flows back to people, to real folks. And this means creating mechanisms for consent and sharing findings transparently. That means thinking outside of the box. One of the things that I had to do was that it was really hard to get consent from young people around how we use the social media data. So we would just go to their community. We would go to churches. We would go to nonprofit agencies. We would go to the basketball court and share with people what we were doing and get their feedback in real time around how we were approaching these topics so we can get individual level consent.
Yeah, I really love how you really did the sort of grassroots on the ground approach. And with your mention of giving power back to the people, I want to focus on your unique work with Black and Brown youth. What makes the skills and experiences of young people of color vital to the AI development process? And how can they, in turn, ensure this technology benefits their communities?
For sure. I love this question. And I think my starting point has been to reimagine even how I think about their work. And so a big shift for me as an academic has been to work with young folks as domain experts or community experts as opposed to research participants. And that redefining of the role hopefully puts power back into young people and communities and honors their lived experience as expertise and a major contributor to how we can develop algorithmic systems. And that we need this data, we need this entry point. It is an imperative to how we can do any of the work that we're trying to do ethically. So I think one of the things that I would also say is that I think young people of color are cultural innovators, have always been, and are digital navigators. And they've shown me and others that social media isn't just a communication tool. It's a neighborhood where community and identity and resilience are built. And their ability to navigate these spaces in, decode language and create meaning in ways AI often struggles to understand what is essential to developing AI tools. And so I think when we engage young people as collaborators and not just as subjects of study, they help us ask better questions. And in one project, young participants challenged our assumption that aggression was always negative. And they pointed out that some expressions of anger were rooted in grief and called for help. And they pushed us to develop algorithms that can detect a broader emotional spectrum, creating tools that were hopefully more accurate and empathetic. Again, if we had not been in conversation with those young people, we would have been using the same gold standard techniques in AI that would only see Black and brown folks in a really myopic way. So I think the key is ensuring they were not just invited into the process. That happens a lot. Folks like to say, "Oh, yes, this is cool. You brought in young people." But if you tack it on at the end to meet some grant requirement, it's not really going to be helpful. So you really have to think about the starting point. And I always believe that it begins in the beginning of a project. I think through this kind of collaboration, you can also offer mentorship and support and other ways of direct involvement through design that can equip young people to do this work as a career or to do this work in their communities. And so part of it is also saying, this is an opportunity. This is not just about research. This is about unlocking opportunities, new workforce opportunities, new collaborative opportunities that rest and live in communities of color so that they can do work on their communities for their communities.
Absolutely. I really love how they've even are trying to challenge the notion around what anger means. That's something that's an emotion I'm actually trying to embody more of like in this next year, is that, anger comes from a place of grief, like you said, but it also comes from a place of love. Like, why am I angry about this particular thing? Is because I have a deep emotional attachment to it. And that relationship between anger and love, I think, is also very important for the future of social movements. So I really love how they're bringing this idea into like the future of how we understand this emotion.
Yeah.
But staying on course about youth, what role do you think families and parents play in shaping happy and healthy platform experiences, especially for young people of color, as technology becomes an essential part of all of our lives?
Yeah. This year I've spent an enormous amount of time talking to parents, and I've realized that they have been an untapped space. And I
Mm-hmm.
think parents are scared and
Mm-hmm.
terrified because they're getting lots of mixed messages about the realities of social media and how to help their young people navigate social media. So I think there are a few things that are important to note. Number one is families are the first educators for all of us. However, we have not seen that move into this digital space in a way that I think is helping both parents and their families. I think for young people of color, platforms offer connection and
Mm-hmm.
creativity, but they can also expose them to harm, including racism and violence and misrepresentation. So I think parents and caregivers play a critical role in helping youth navigate these complexities. And so I really want to encourage families to create open lines of communication. When your child comes home and you're asking them about school, you should also be asking them about their digital life, because it is not
Mm-hmm.
this virtual thing that exists off to the side. It is integrated into the daily life. Social media is life. And so you can ask questions like, what's your favorite thing about being online? Or what's something that made you uncomfortable on
Mm-hmm.
and these conversations, I think, build trust and help youth develop critical thinking skills they need to evaluate that help them evaluate their digital experiences. I think parents and caregivers have to make a personal decision about whether or not their child should have access to these tools. There's lots of conversations about taking social media away, and I really
Mm-hmm.
and want that power to rest within families that know their young person. Young people have different levels of maturity. Some folks are ready and can act and can use features in ways that are really useful, and some folks need a bit more time to figure out what it means to show up in these digital spaces. And so I think parents need to feel comfortable about having these types of conversations and making decisions based on what they know about their young people. I also think that I want to see parents talking to their pediatricians and
Mm-hmm.
other care providers and asking their healthcare providers about the impact of social media on mental health, on physical health, and how their young people are seeing the world. And think about how social media can become a part of their treatment plan, whether or not they should show up more or show up less in these spaces as well. But I don't think families can do this alone. So this is why I
Mm-hmm.
think children's hospitals are really important. Schools and policymakers and tech companies have to provide resources to help parents understand the platforms for their children's use. And I think platforms in particular have a responsibility to create environments that prioritize safety and joy for all
Mm-hmm.
users, especially those who are coming from vulnerable populations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really much brings me to my next question is, on the platform side, how are you bringing your work to the industry? What is your experience connecting social science research to improving users' experiences on certain platforms? Are safety features like Instagram for kids sufficient? Like, what more needs to be done?
Yeah, I love this question because I get to be a social worker with tech companies, and that's been something that I never thought would be a reality. So I get to work closely with a number of tech companies to bridge this gap between social science and product design and AI development. I think one of the most impactful aspects of this work has been training product teams to incorporate reflexivity and design justice principles into the development process. And these sessions, I think, encourage engineers and researchers to question their assumptions and to reflect on the social impact of their work and hopefully collaborate across disciplines to build ethical systems from the ground up. Reflexivity is a really important term and practice that I think technologists should think about as an imperative to how they do their work. And reflexivity for me is deep reflection about one's assumptions, values, and positionality. And it's also about how do you leverage that new thinking for transformational justice. And I think it has been key to reimagining how teams collaborate and create safe and ethical and healthy AI driven products. For example, in a training with a platform team I did recently, we explored how their content moderation algorithms disproportionately silence Black and Brown users. And so guided exercises and open dialogue, the team rethought their approach, incorporating cultural nuance into their models. And the result was a moderation system that didn't just enforce rules, but recognized the richness of the human expression. And so I think the biggest lesson here is ethical thinking has to start from the very beginning. This cannot be your response to something bad that you've already done. It's not something you bolt on after a product is built. It's collaboration across disciplines, bringing in all types of folks and to ensure that bias mitigation becomes an integral part of innovation. And again, I have to reiterate, this work isn't just about fixing problems, it's about reshaping and reimagining how we can work together. And to the question around, young people using Instagram with the new youth features that have been created, again, these are conversations that families need to have together. And I think no one can tell you whether or not this feature works well for your child. You have to determine based on what the feature offers, your family and your cultural context and what matters for the values that you have for your family, and your child's maturity level and readiness to use those tools. And I think if you think about those three various concepts, that will inform the decision that you will make on whether or not using Instagram for kids is the right decision for your household.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the wonderful thing about the internet is that it is global, and I feel like a lot of the conversations around trust and safety are sort of U.S. Europe focused, and Black and Brown youth are all across the world, including the diaspora. So, what are some lessons and things that you've learned that could be potentially applied to low resource, not necessarily well spoken languages in like the subcontinent of Africa? What is the future of content moderation in that regard? If you have any thoughts about that, is AI the solution? Anything we can do to support other Black and Brown people in the global majority?
Yeah, so I am hopeful because I see the potential of AI to be a force for joy and connection if we ask better questions, if we learn where our expertise ends and where community expertise begins, and if we're willing to put our non-negotiables on the table and to constantly refer to them as we engage and embark upon using these tools for society. I have reimagined my own work because of these lessons learned. And I think a key consideration that has to be made is what's the role of listening in AI development? How do we develop better listening skills to transform and help us transition when we need to pivot? And so one of the new projects that I'm focused on is one around joy, because it birthed out of something that I had missed. The reality is that there were lots of young people that were de-escalating violence on their platforms by using joy and humor and happiness and fun as a way to de-escalate or quell an aggressive argument that was flowing online. And so that observation and kind of gap in my own work birthed this project that we're calling JoyNet. And JoyNet is a machine learning powered platform that is focused on creating healthier digital neighborhoods where young people can thrive. And so JoyNet uses AI to amplify moments of joy that have been defined and conceptualized from Black and Brown young people in New York City and Philadelphia. And the goal is to amplify these moments of joy and resilience and well-being on platforms like TikTok with the goal of shifting the narrative from harm to hope. And this work is inspired by young people who've shown me that joy is resistance. So again, listening and being in conversation and being willing to change your question has come from being in collaboration. I think collaboration is innovation in this space is something that we need to think through. And these young people have taught me that digital spaces don't have to be battlegrounds. They can be sanctuaries for creativity and community and healing. And so JoyNet is about embedding those values into technology. Joy is a starting place for how we build technology tools, ensuring that hopefully platforms support young people in creating and experiencing healthier and thriving online worlds. And so in the next decade, I want to see AI systems that don't just respond to problems, but actively foster thriving. And my hope is for an industry that centers humanity and uplifts marginalized voices and redefines technology as a tool for collective joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really reminds me of the importance of third spaces, especially for youth.
Yep.
When I was younger, my mom would take me to the playground. As a teenager, we would go to the mall. And so many of these spaces no longer exist. So what role does social media play in creating these third spaces for young people?
Well, I think number one, social media can be the third space, and young
Mm-hmm.
people have already leveraged various social media platforms for building social movement, for accessing news, but also reimagining the news to bring in news that is important for their lived realities and their communities. It also allows them to build really important connections, right? And I think the thing that we need to continue to think about is how do we help young people build connections in online settings that
Mm-hmm.
also have a really unique and important impact in their physical world as well. It
Mm-hmm.
can't just sit in the digital world. We live in both worlds. So how do we make sure that that is moving between both spheres? It's really important. But I think, again, we have to treat young people as the innovators that they are. We need to be
Mm-hmm.
listening. We need to be working with them on policy development. We need to have
Mm-hmm.
seats at the table. And if we don't, and if we're not ready for that, get rid of the table and just allow people to talk and connect,
Yeah.
grow in these spaces as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you brought in policy. Is there anything that you want to see from the policy community? Is there anything that you'd like to see differently? What is it that policymakers can do to make, your work more valuable or more helpful or even better supporting young people?
God, there's so much. But I think number one, we need funding and opportunities to conduct social media research. And we have seen a
Absolutely.
dramatic rollback of platforms not allowing researchers to collect data from social media. This has a direct impact on our ability to do rigorous science and to
Mm-hmm.
understand how the digital world affects the physical world. We need funding at the federal level to do ethical and rigorous work that includes um, social media. We need to have young people as a part of developing policies. And so we need to have them at the table helping us to craft those policies, reevaluating those policies, or throwing out content that is not useful or that is harmful. And we need to really think about the role of digital literacy. And this is a space that I think has just been under tapped. What would it mean for us to have national digital literacy,
Mm-hmm.
learn about not just about AI, but around the world of around digital life as our world? And what does it mean to be a citizen of these digital worlds? What agreements do we need to have with each other? How do we resolve conflict in digital spaces?
Mm-hmm.
Been kind of thrusted into these spaces in a way without any preparation. And so I think that we can work together. We need platforms to help provide access and allow for us to do this really rigorous work. We need to partner with schools and nonprofit agencies. We need to have conversations with parents, and parents need to be talking to pediatricians. There's so many different entry points and connections that I think need to be at the center of how policy is then developed.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to give us enough time for Q&A because I see we have a couple of questions. But to end on a positive note, what are your aspirations for the future? Are you hopeful? So much of our discussions around AI tend to be doom and gloom. But how do you stay happy and excited? And what are your some expectations for the AI industry in the next decade? I know you mentioned a couple, but if you wanted to add any
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, I will just end with, as you might now understand, I'm really focused on joy and thinking about how we integrate joy into the practice and development of AI systems and tools. And so what would it mean if joy is at the center of how you crafted algorithmic systems? How might it change the inputs that you put in? How might it change how you evaluate the accuracy of systems? How does it shape how we create teams that build AI tools if joy is at the center? Does it help us to check and evaluate when we've gone in the wrong direction? I'm hopeful because I get to hang out with cool folks like you who are thinking critically about these issues, and there's lots of communities that are building. I think we have a lot of work ahead of us over the next few years, but I'm seeing that momentum. I'm seeing that excitement. And my hope is that others join us in this space. We need funders and philanthropists that are thinking actively about developing thriving and healthy digital communities. What does that mean? How do we create that? How do we ensure that we all get to experience a healthy social media space? We don't have to exist in a world where social media is our problem. I think we've become accustomed to that, but how can that shift for us if we center joy and have a joy practice in AI development and AI deployment?
Yes, absolutely. And I think so much of getting there is also going to be changing how we think about trust and safety. You know, we're so concentrated among academics, engineers at platforms, niche policy people, but we're really going to have to bring in, social workers, teachers, community organizers into this. So I'm very excited and super energized for all these amazing questions that we have. So first one is from Jerry Weinstein. To what extent do pediatricians possess knowledge and training re-social media? This is because the user asks this because they've done work with the patient-facing medical community, and they're years behind when it comes to education over suicidal ideation.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I'm going to say I don't know. I'm not an MD. I don't know much about the training of pediatricians in this space, but through my time at CHOP and other conversations that I have with folks in the medical community, my understanding is that there's very little training around social media. There are folks that are doing really impactful work around data analytics and informatics in this space, but it's more so the development of tools as opposed to understanding social media as a neighborhood where young people live that affects their mental health and physical health. So one of the things that I'm trying to push is that what would it mean for children's hospitals to standardize the study of social media and to think about how what we learn from that study informs treatment and intervention and new protocols. What do we need? How do we collaborate? How do we provide training? So when you're coming to your clinic for a checkup and you want to ask questions about social media for your child, what can we give you? What resource do you need? And so I think we need that thinking, and that thinking will require pediatricians and psychiatrists and nurses and social workers. And so I see this as a real opportunity, and I want to invite folks, if you're someone that is interested in this space, would love to collaborate with you to think about how we make social media resources embedded in children's hospitals.
Yeah, I love that. Next question is from Akshika Patel. Dr. Patton, do you see technology companies truly integrating equity concerns in the programming and training of AI? If not, what steps can we, the public, take to compel them to design equity seriously?
Yeah, I've had the good fortune of working with tech companies that care. It's hard work, and oftentimes I think the challenge that I see is that there are lots of folks in the mid-level space that deeply care and are doing research and are trying to get folks motivated. And the reality is that that thinking and that level of care has to move up the chain into the C-suite to have resources that are then deployed across companies to make this an imperative. One of the things that I learned from working across tech platforms is that there's a disparity between care and timelines and priorities. And so lots of folks care, but if caring is not a priority at your work, or if it's not something that you are measured on for your performance, and if you don't have the timeline, the bandwidth, or the capacity to actually implement care in your work, it doesn't matter if I come to your company and do 18,000 trainings. It has to map onto measurable metrics. It has to map on to the bottom line. I think we can do that work, but there has to be some level of agreement and conversations that isn't just centered in the middle of companies.
Yeah, love that. We have another question that asks if you could explain a little bit more about the contextual analysis of social media and how we can potentially extend that use in humanitarian action.
Yeah, so this is a methodological strategy. And it's one that kind of sits in social science theory and AI development. And it's really at its best an annotation process. And so in CHASM, we ask folks who annotate data, typically social media data, to look for context in 7 different strategies. And I'm not going to remember all 7 right now, but it's things like looking at the author's communication, looking at their virality and their engagement, identifying resources that help you contextualize language, and knowing when you need to be consulting community level expertise. And then we ask people to include that context in how they annotate data. And usually what we see is that we have a baseline understanding. Your first interpretation has no context. You go through CHASM, you are now drowning in context. And usually what we see with our annotators is now they have a different opinion around how they're interpreting what they're seeing online. And that interpretation matters for then how we then train algorithmic systems to go back and find that data. And so now the label is something that you can trust more. Mm-hmm. It's contextually driven and has the insights from young people and other community members that oftentimes are missing for how we are currently annotating data for computational systems.
Amazing. I think that is all the time we have for today. Thank you to Dr. Patton for being an incredible panelist and joining me in an enlightening conversation on such an important issue, and to everyone, our attendees, for joining our webinar this afternoon. The conversation does not stop here. Please support responsible tech organizations promoting diversity and inclusion in AI, like All Tech is Human, and be sure to follow them on social media and join the Slack group to stay connected. We hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Stay well, and happy holidays to those who are celebrating.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.